Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you, as always, by the GSMC Sports Network. Before we get into our second segment of the day here on the show, I do want to remind you yet again that if you wish to interact with the show on a more direct scale, make use of the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. You can do either one of two things. Click that $sign in the comment section, leave a tip or donation, or just leave a comment in my comment section that I can read aloud. Get your opinion out there. Just make the show that much better. Just makes me that much more appreciative of all you do for the show and the network especially. Without further ado, let us get into our second segment of the show, continuing this Thursday Night Football narrative, but now from a prop bets perspective, because there are a lot of interesting props that can come about for you tomorrow night. And funnily enough, I want to talk about something that is very rare when I'm taking notes for the show. Usually, I look sometimes very foolish in terms of, say, writing something beforehand and having something detrimental to that prediction happen. But, funnily enough, when I was writing down props for Thursday Night Football, I did not even consider Stefon Diggs. So I guess that's a quote-unquote blessing in disguise, because I never want to talk about an injury as a quote-unquote blessing. But it is kind of funny and ironic that in a moment that could have come back to haunt me, I didn't end up choosing a player that got injured. So lucky me for this particular segment. But let's just get right into it. Starting off on the Jets side of things, actually, let's talk about Aaron Rodgers in this game a little bit. Now, I feel like the best we've seen of Aaron Rodgers this season is when he can control and dictate the tempo of the game. There are moments when, he gets a little bit frustrated in terms of potentially how slow the offense is moving. But when there's a certain tempo, there's a certain intention to the Jets' offense, that's when we've seen glimmers and hope of what it could be. And so, in tonight's game, I feel like the same sentiment will carry over to the point where the over on Aaron Rodgers' passing yards, I feel like can hit. So I'm going to take the over for tomorrow night in passing yards as IP14 leaves a comment. Traded DJ Moore for Malik Neighbors, W or L. Now, I feel like this trade is going to be highly dependent on, how both of these respective receiver seasons panned out. Because I feel like Malik Neighbors is still someone who has a lot of upside. I'm not saying, that the overall outlook of the Giants' offense will bring his level of play down. That has to be a consideration. Whereas DJ Moore, week in, week out, I feel like has steadily improved. So it's going to depend on, how variable this Bears offense looks going forward. If they can get more out of guys like Odunze and Keenan Allen. And then on the Malik Neighbors side of things, it's just going to depend on how well the Giants can do in terms of scoring points. If they can find a rhythm in the red zone to score more points for Malik Neighbors. That being said, if I had to look at this from a straight-up trade and not even think about outside factors, I would say it's an L. But the reason why this trade has hope to succeed for both parties is because of the fact Malik Neighbors just has that potential week in, week out. And not for nothing, that could carry the Giants to shock people in certain ways because of the fact he's so good in certain areas of his game that you can't ignore the talent just because he plays for an abysmal offensive team. So that's why I feel like this trade can work out, but on face value, I would say it's looking to be a pretty bad trade. Hopefully this helps in some regard. Good luck to you in your other fantasy football exploits. Let me know if you have any other questions, but thank you for that one, IP14, and I hope you enjoy the rest of this. As IP also says, he felt like he needed the upside. So if it's an upside thing, then I actually think, this can work out for you. But if it was more of, say, a reach, then maybe there was a reason to be skeptical about it. But if you feel like the upside outweighs, the output, then that's your certain feeling and opinions, and I can't really come in between that because, this is a trade between two very good receivers, and they can help you in many different ways. It's just one plays for a hopeful offense and the other plays for one that's not so much very hopeful. So that was just my opinion on that. Going back into my prop bets for this Thursday night football game, I say Aaron Rodgers hits the over because there are going to be some moments where he's going to be in rhythm, he's going to find the receivers he wants, and he's going to get certain big plays on the field, but others where he gets a little impatient, gets a little bit frustrated, he's going to push a little bit too much, and thus the rails could come off in certain moments. Now let's look at the other side of this thing. C.J. Stroud. In this game, as IP14 says, I'm a Bears fan and I don't like how the OC using more at all. It hasn't really improved much either. To that point, I can see why there are frustrations in terms of the Bears receiver room, but I still think out of all of them, Moore has been one of those players. As IP also says, I think he thinks Rowe might get more involved too. I think out of all those players in that receiver core, DJ Moore has proven the most in terms of getting more touches. I feel the same way in a certain regard in that, you still feel like you can do more and mean more in return for this Bears team, but it's at the point where you feel like DJ Moore is just primed for success down this latter stages of the season because of what we've seen these past couple of weeks. In terms of Rome being more involved, I certainly feel like he needs to be, and I feel like in certain moments there are going to be times where he's going to be targeted more often than not, but that is a huge part of his game. Where on the field the Bears are relative to his skill set, if you know what I mean, for Rome. Because he's a very interesting receiver in that he's a solid route runner, but in the red zone especially, he can really help them. So it's going to be interesting to see week in, week out how those targets get meted out in that Bears receiver core. Thank you for your comments. And we'll get back to the top opets here. C.J. Stroud, I think in this game, it's not always going to be about him. It's not always going to be about, what he does with the football in his hands. So that's why I'm going to take the under here. 1.5 passing touchdowns at minus 234. Just because I feel like this whole season has been defined by the versatility of what the Texans want on the opposite side of football. It's not always going to be about, C.J. Stroud having to play hero ball. It's the balance of Joe Mixon. It's a balance now with a more balanced receiving room, but in this case, maybe not so much tomorrow night. But I still think C.J. Stroud will affect the game, just not in a way in which his stats will look as lofty as they did last year. So look for him to be functional in this game, but not be the reason the Texans win it. Now let's transition to another Jets prop bet really quickly here before we go into more about what the Texans offense could look like, as they are, in my opinion, the more interesting team to dissect here from a bets perspective. Davante Adams, and then this is a game where, like I said, moments will happen for this Jets offense. And in those moments, Davante Adams will shine because Aaron Rodgers will always look for Davante Adams as his first read, will always look for him as his first target. And so that's why I think he's going to have over 4.5 receptions, and minus 138. And that's, what this Jets offense is going to be predicated on. Because Aaron Rodgers is the one who wanted Davante Adams, so they have to prove that, they can work together in this very volatile Jets team. As IP also says, he likes Brees receptions or receiving yards. I like them too, just because, as IP also says, Jets O-line is going to get crumbled. I do too. I just feel like that's the tenor of this offense, They need to play in tempo, need the run game to get going, or else it falls off the tracks. And so that's why I feel like Davante Adams and Breece Hall are so pivotal, because one of them can get Rodgers going in the pass game, the other keeps him upright. So that's why I feel like those two players are the only two players who I'd be willing to bet money on that their success is integral to the Jets' success in tomorrow night's game. Going over and back to the Texans side of things to conclude this segment, I think the Texans' offensive game plan will be very similar to the Jets do. I feel like, C.J. Stroud's not going to push the ball downfield that much. I feel like, Joe Mixon is a big part of their offense now. And, with the lack of receiving depth now, I feel like, they're not going to be able to sustain a heavy passing game. And so that's why I feel like guys like Joe Mixon and Tank Dell are going to be vital. So I'm going to say Joe Mixon hits the over, 78.5 rush yards at minus 137. And Tank Dell is going to hit the under in 57.5 receiving yards. And now this looks the safest bets because Joe Mixon's role just got more important. Because if he runs the football effectively, that opens up a lot more avenues for the Texans to pick apart what is now becoming a Jet secondary that, while still vaunted, can be scored against. So look for both of these players to mean certain things at certain moments for the Texans in this one. And then, before we go to break real quickly, we want to address one final comment that IP14 just had. Knowing the Jets, they'll probably give Braylon Allen 10-plus carries. I don't necessarily think it'll be the worst thing, because Braylon Allen has proved that he's more than serviceable as a backup to Breece Hall. But there is some truth in stagnation when, the Jets' running game doesn't feel very settled. And so they need to prove that both of these guys can be beneficial to their identity going forward, or else those Braylon Allen touches won't equate to much in terms of what the Jets want to look like in the future. And so that's why I feel like Breece Hall is someone who you need to see have a huge game tomorrow night, and also Devontae Adams, because those feel the players who you need to invest a lot in going forward if you want to have any success on the offense side of the football. So I feel like Braylon Allen in this game might not mean as much as people think, but he still is someone to be wary of because he could be a boom to what the Jets do, or he could be very detrimental. So it's a double-edged sword here, but I'm erring on the side of caution with a guy like Braylon Allen, and most importantly, what he means for the Jets' offense. But let me know what you continue to think in the comments about tomorrow night's game. But coming up on the other side, we're going to be concluding our positional rankings for the week, starting off with our tight ends before transitioning to our defenses and special teams units. And this week, the tight ends get a little bit more clear-cut. There's a little bit of sameness to them this week, but there are some guys who I'm kind of taking a flyer on, and you might want to too. So don't go anywhere. Be right back after this short break.